Hey guys, it's Luna. If you don't already know who I am, I'm previously a Hearthstone Grandmaster and I've played Worlds 3 times. And today in this video I wanted to talk to you guys about the best decks to play for the Heroic Tavern Brawl. If you don't already know what the Heroic Tavern Brawl is, it's something that comes around once every few months. It's very similar to Arena, where you try and play until you hit 12 wins or 3 losses, except instead of building your own deck and like you would in Arena, you actually have to come with the constructed deck in its standard format. So I'm going to be talking about the best decks to play in the standard format. It's 12 wins or 3 losses, and it's also 1,000 gold to enter, so I think a lot of people consider it pretty high stakes. If you don't get more than a few wins, you don't really get very many rewards, but if you get up to 12 wins, you can get a lot of rewards, so it can be extremely rewarding. So I just wanted to help you guys out and give you a few deck ideas. In this video, I'm going to start with the easiest decks to play and kind of work our way up to more difficult, skill-intensive decks to play. So the first deck we have here is Pure Paladin. This deck is pretty straightforward. It's pretty much an aggro Paladin deck where you just want to curve out. I think the biggest difference with this type of deck is that you are going to actually keep your order in the court. So the way order the court combo works is that it's going to reorganize your deck, so you're going to draw your Light Rays, then your Countess, and then your Blood Crusader. So actually, if you play Order on turn 2 on the coin, you will guarantee draw Blood Crusader by turn 5, which means you can coin out Blood Crusader and play the Countess on turn 5, which will basically allow you to cheat out a lot of legendaries on the following turn. If you're going first, you probably want to wait until turn 3, so you can do the same combo, but just going off on turn 6 instead. It has kind of a decent matchup spread. It's pretty good against decks like Mindlock and Blessed Priest, but it's also kind of weak against decks like Unholy or Frost Death Knight or Aggro Mage. It's kind of susceptible to not being able to deal with better aggression. It's harder for it to come back, but it is able to deal with giant minions. So if you're playing against Rogue, for example, you have some tools like the Class Action Lawyer that can shrink down a really big minion. So if you're looking for an easy deck to play, that's kind of straightforward, I definitely recommend this one. Let's see for our next deck. Our next deck we have Unholy Death Knight. Now this is actually a pretty new deck that has seen a lot of success in the higher legend ranks. I believe Atsuna was the first person. He's a really good French player and a friend of mine. As far as matchup spreads go, this deck is a little bit weaker against Frost Death Knight and Mindlock. It's good against Aggro Mage and Miracle Rogue. The mulligans for this deck are pretty straightforward. You just want to keep an early curve, especially Necromancer and Trog. Now, if you don't already know what the Necromancer does, it recently got a buff. It basically spins a corpse at the end of your turn to summon a taunt minion, and this can be very, very annoying to deal with. And finally, with this deck, you're gonna kill them with the Grave Strength, which is similar to a Bloodlust card, whereas Bloodlust is temporary and 5 mana. Grave Strength will permanently give your minions a lot of attack. So this deck is a very, very minion-based deck, which has some strengths and weaknesses. It does have some more interaction. You know, you have Vizier, which can find really strong counterplay. It gives you access to other runes besides Unholy. You also have Skull Teacher, which can find necessary removal spells as well. I think it's a kind of a sleeper deck. I think it's really strong for the Heroic Tavern Brawl. Not only is it pretty straightforward to play, but I think it also catches a lot of people off guard, especially since a lot of people aren't really expecting this deck, and it's already proven itself in the high legend ranks. So this is definitely one deck that I would check out. See you next up. We have, Next up we have Aggro Mage. Aggro Mage is a deck that HS Replay is actually saying is the highest win rate deck in high legend ranks at the moment. A lot of people use this deck to get a really nice finish. It's pretty good against Rogue and most of the meta. It's kind of weak against Mindlock, Unholy, and Blood DK. The way this deck works is you want to play a bunch of early minions and use these minions to generate as much chip damage as you can, and then your goal is to finish your opponent off with cards like Frozen Touch, Arcane spells off the Arc Splitter. And you also have Egwene. Egwene's really interesting because Egwene can be used to give your spell power card, or gives your spell damage, or gives your damage cards more spell power, which can generate a lot more burst. which can be hard for your opponent to deal with because not only do they have to worry about killing your board, but they also have to worry about gaining a lot of armor as well. This deck also features Deathborn, which is a really nice card. A lot of the meta right now is centered around aggro decks, and a lot of these aggro decks are pretty weak to Deathborn, and I think a lot of unsuspecting players might not really expect you to play Deathborn, so you can definitely catch people off guard. This deck also has a lot of reach as well. It has a lot of freezing effects. It has cards like Astalor to go over the top. Dungeoneer is really good because Dungeoneer will always guarantee draw a frost spell, so that's a card you want to make sure you always keep in this deck. You can discover spells as well with the Alchemist. Yeah, and Shivara can also be used to double up on your burn spells or your flurries. So this is kind of a aggro / controlling style deck where you want to be very aggressive early on, and then the mid game you kind of want to shift to a more controlling style, and then the end game just finish off your opponent with burn. Alright, and then next up we have Frost Death Knight. Frost Death Knight is a deck that has hit rank 1 legend several times. Brutus hit it on rank 1 on America several times. It's pretty solid overall. It has a very similar feel to Aggro Demon Hunter and also Mage as well. It's similar to Mage in the sense that you have freezing tools that can control the board and kind of prevent your opponent from killing you. And it also has a lot of burn spells as well. It's similar to DH where you have these cheap early minions that are very annoying to deal with. So you have cards like Slither Spear, Harbinger to draw you a lot of cards. Death Chiller is really good. It's basically a Flame Waker. You have more reach and Vizier. And then, of course, you have cards like Frostworm's Fury to go over the top. And then you have cards like Lady Death Whisper, which can give you a lot more burn. So this deck is going to play very, very similar to Aggro Mage, where you just want to get a lot of chip damage with your minions early on. In the mid game, you kind of want to stop your opponent from getting a lot of their damage in, freezing their big minions, and then finally at the end of the game, just finish them off with burn. As far as matchups go, it's a little bit weaker to Mage, it's a little bit weaker to Mindlock, but overall it has a pretty decent matchup spread, so there aren't really any matchups that you're too worried about facing. Next up, we have Miracle Rogue. This should be a pretty familiar deck. It was on top of the meta the entire last patch. Of course, we don't have nulls anymore, so to compensate, this deck is a little bit more combo oriented with cards like Jaka and Mailbox Dancer. Now, as far as mulligans go, I think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards keeping Dancer, which I don't actually recommend. You can keep Dancer if you have cards like Jaka and you're already on coin, but for the most part, you want to look for cards like Potion Belt, Cutlass, and Location. Your goal with this deck is to try and just sculpt your hand the first few turns with cards like Potion Belt, finding good potions, reducing your hands with cards like Cutlass. Maybe play an Alchemist to make your future potions a lot better. Now, this deck is really difficult to play. You have a lot of options. You basically have to decide on when the best turn to go in is. The meta is pretty aggressive as well, so if you're facing down early aggression, you have to consider, how are you going to use your early removal to try and answer their board while also saving enough resources for your pop-off turn. So I don't really recommend this deck if you're newer to the game. It's a lot more difficult, but if you're comfortable with the rogue playstyle and maybe played Null Rogue last patch, you can try this deck out. It might work well for you. A lot of players do well with it at high legend ranks. I know Pocket Train has played this deck to rank 1 legend. A lot of players have done really well with it. I personally have played it a lot. I think I hover around about 60% win rate with it. Now, the interesting thing about this deck is the stats for it actually aren't that great. I think if you go to HS Replay, it'll say it's actually slightly unfavored against a lot of the top meta decks. But I think a lot of that comes down to play skill, because this deck has so much play to it. So you need to be well practiced. I think if you were to take this deck to TAVERN Brawl, probably practice with it on ladder first. But if you're comfortable with it, I think it's an extremely strong deck to play. It doesn't really have any bad matchups. It might be slightly weak to, maybe some of the top meta decks, but if you're a good player, I think you can outplay them. And then finally, for our last deck, we have Phylactery Warlock, or Mindlock. This deck is pretty straightforward in its overall game plan. Your goal is just basically to kill your mine, have a rod out to discount your hand, and then you can either go Tamsin Phylactery, or if you have Devour, you can go Devour Phylactery and clear your board. The reason why I have this deck last is because it's an extremely technical deck to play. You have to manage your resources, so you have to figure out how to optimally clear your opponent's board while saving enough resources that you can deal with your opponent's boards in the future turns. This deck is extremely strong against a lot of the smaller minion decks like Unholy DK, Aggro Mage, Frost DK, because you have a lot of early game removal, and you have cards like Tamsin, and you have cards like Rod, which basically give your hand makes your hand extremely cheap. It makes it extremely easy for you to just kind of thwart what your opponent's trying to do. So it's really good against the chip and burn damage game plan. It's a lot weaker against Rogue and Boon, because if your opponent makes a giant minion, of course you don't really have any removal. Now, not to say you can't win those matchups. You have to kind of nut draw your opponent and have Rod on 5. Which, speaking of which, if you're going for mulligans with this deck, I recommend trying to err on the side of hard mulliganing for Rod. If you don't have Rod on turn 5, you're in a very tough spot, because it's going to be very, very difficult for you to be mana efficient and keep up with your opponent. If you do have Rod on 5, I think you're favored in a lot of matchups, and you can even win the unwinnable ones. So if you're comfortable with combo, and you're comfortable with the overall type of feel for combo, and this is more of your playstyle, it's definitely one of the stronger decks right now. So hopefully this helped. I just wanted to do a quick brief overview of a lot of the top decks and just give you guys some ideas. I'll leave the deck codes down below so you guys can copy them and let me know how you do in the Tavern Brawls. I hope they work well for you. Of course, I'll be streaming Heroic Tavern Brawl a lot in the next couple days, so feel free to check that out if you want. And feel free to follow, like, and subscribe. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.